It sounds like science fiction, like something out of a dystopian novel, but this is a true story that most people have never heard of. It is the story of a remote island in the Pacific Ocean where people's bodies began to fail them, where entire families grew old before their time, and where life seemed to move at fast-forward speed. This is the forgotten story of a nuclear testing site, a population caught in the crossfire of the Cold War, and the shocking effects of radiation on the human body. Most of us are familiar with legendary mysterious places like the Bermuda Triangle, or we know about catastrophic disasters like Chernobyl. But almost no one talks about the Marshall Islands, a cluster of tiny islands that once held thriving communities, coconut palms, and turquoise waters. Today, many of them are uninhabited wastelands, poisoned by invisible forces. One particular island stands out in survivor accounts, a place where children showed signs of aging before they even reached adulthood, where illnesses appeared without warning, and where generations seemed to collapse in the span of just a few decades. How did this happen? And why has the world allowed this story to be buried? The Cold War experiment. To understand the mystery of this island, we need to go back to the late 1940s. The Second World War had just ended. The United States had dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and a new era of nuclear power had begun. But America was not done experimenting. Between 1946 and 1958, the US conducted 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. Think about that number for a moment. 67 atomic and hydrogen bombs, detonated in just 12 years, in an area no bigger than a small country. The most infamous of these was the Castle Bravo test in 1954. It was supposed to be a controlled detonation of a new hydrogen bomb. But the scientists miscalculated. The bomb was far more powerful than expected, about 1,000 times stronger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The explosion was so massive that it vaporized entire sections of the atoll and sent a deadly cloud of radioactive fallout drifting for miles. Islanders who lived nearby had no idea what was coming. They saw a flash of light, then a fireball rising into the sky. Within hours, white ash began to fall from the heavens. Children played in it, thinking it was snow. But it was not snow. It was radioactive dust. The first victims. At first, no one understood what was happening. Islanders exposed to the fallout started to develop severe burns on their skin. Their hair fell out in clumps. They vomited and grew weak. Babies were born with strange deformities. But something even more disturbing was happening on a slower scale. Over time, scientists noticed that the people who had stayed in the contaminated areas were aging much faster than normal. Teenagers in their mid-teens had gray streaks in their hair. Adults in their 20s looked like they were in their 50s. Wrinkles, joint pain, and organ failure appeared decades ahead of schedule. This wasn't just illness. It was as if the very clock of their biology had been rewired. The science of rapid aging. How is this possible? Radiation is one of the most destructive forces known to science. At the cellular level, radiation shreds DNA, damaging the blueprints that tell our bodies how to grow, repair, and reproduce. Normally, when DNA is damaged, cells either repair themselves or self-destruct. But under high radiation, cells mutate or break down uncontrollably. This can cause cancer, but it can also mimic something known as progeria, a rare genetic disorder that causes children to age prematurely. In progeria, kids can look elderly by the time they are 10 years old. Radiation, in some cases, triggered a similar effect in the Marshallese Islanders. Their cells were not dividing correctly. Their chromosomes shortened. Their bodies weakened long before their time. Imagine being 12 years old but looking 40. Imagine being a parent and realizing that your children might never even reach adulthood because their bodies were collapsing from the inside out. Eyewitness accounts. Survivors who later spoke about their experiences described life on the island as a nightmare. One woman recalled how her younger brother, only 8 years old, had white patches of hair like an old man. Others remembered cousins who looked decades older than they really were. When outsiders visited the islands years later, they were shocked. The coconut trees no longer bore fruit. Fish populations had dwindled. Livestock gave birth to animals with strange deformities. Villagers described strange burns that appeared overnight, sores that would not heal, and babies who were born without bones or with severe developmental problems. One Marshallese elder, when asked about her return to the island decades later, said, "It was like walking into a graveyard. The land looked alive, but everything was poisoned." Even the people who survived carried the island's death inside their bodies. The silence of governments. So why don't we hear about this story? The truth is, much of it was deliberately hidden. The United States government relocated many of the affected islanders, but they did not fully explain the dangers. In some cases, islanders were even returned to contaminated areas as part of what some researchers now describe as human experiments. Admitting the full consequences of the nuclear testing program would have meant acknowledging that entire communities were sacrificed without consent. It would have meant paying reparations on a massive scale. So instead, much of the story faded from public memory. Even today, official reports claim that parts of the Marshall Islands are safe for resettlement. But independent scientists who visit with Geiger counters and soil testing kits tell a very different story. Radiation levels in some areas are still higher than those found in Chernobyl's exclusion zone. Living on fast forward for the people who lived there, life was truly like a film stuck on fast forward. Children grew old before their time. Parents buried children who looked older than they did. Generations collapsed in a few short decades. The psychological scars were as deep as the physical ones. Survivors described feeling like they were cursed, like time itself was punishing them. Some believed the gods were angry. Others thought they had been abandoned by the outside world. To this day, the Marshallese people carry higher rates of cancer, thyroid disease, and other radiation-related illnesses than almost any population on Earth. And the memory of their lost island lingers like a wound that never heals. The hidden legacy, the tragedy of this forgotten island is not just about radiation. It is about the arrogance of humanity, about the way powerful nations treated small, remote communities as disposable. The Marshall Islands were chosen for nuclear testing because they were far from the mainland, isolated, and politically powerless. Few people in America even knew where they were. And so, they became a laboratory. But the island fought back in its own way. The land itself became uninhabitable. The soil, the water, the very air held the memory of what had been done. And the bodies of the survivors carried the story, aging before their time, living proof of the cost of human ambition. Why this matters today, you might be wondering. Why should we care about this now? The answer is simple. Because the world is once again facing the dangers of nuclear escalation. Because even today, there are more than 12,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. And because the story of the Marshall Islands reminds us that the victims of these weapons are often innocent civilians, people who never had a say in the matter. It also reminds us that science is not always used for good. The same force that powers nuclear energy, that could light up cities and power industries, is also capable of erasing entire generations. The story of the island where people age twice as fast is a warning. A reminder of what happens when human ambition outpaces human responsibility. Conclusion. The next time someone tells you aging is natural, remember this: there are places in the world where human beings were forced to live life in fast forward. A whole community erased, not by time, but by human decisions. It is a chilling reminder that sometimes, the scariest truths are the ones hidden in plain sight. If you found this story shocking, share it with someone who loves mysteries, and make sure to subscribe for more dark and hidden curiosities from history. Because sometimes, the things you don't know are the ones you'll never forget. Did you know there are places on Earth where stepping ashore could literally change the way your body ages? Today, we dive into one of the most shocking and least known stories in human history, a mysterious island where time itself seemed broken. A place where people's lives were cut short, their bodies aging at twice the normal speed. This is not science fiction. It is based on real forgotten events that scientists rarely talk about, until now. Most people know about the Bermuda Triangle, Chernobyl, or even the legends of cursed places. But almost no one knows about a tiny Pacific island, once inhabited, now abandoned, where the people who lived there noticed something terrifying. Children looked old before they even reached adulthood. Entire generations vanished in less than half a lifetime. Why did this happen? And why is the island still uninhabited today? In the 1940s and 50s, during the Cold War, the United States conducted secret nuclear tests on small remote islands. One of these places was the Marshall Islands. Specifically, Bikini Atoll and nearby islands were heavily bombed with nuclear weapons, leaving radiation that would last for thousands of years. The islanders were evacuated, but not all of them. Some remained, unaware of what exposure to radiation really meant. The result was horrifying. Their bodies began to break down. Teeth fell out. Hair turned grey in children. And most shocking of all, their cells began aging rapidly, almost like they were living life in fast forward. Scientists later studied survivors from these islands, and what they discovered was disturbing. Radiation does not just cause cancer. It can damage DNA in a way that mimics progeria, a rare disease that makes children appear elderly. Imagine being 10 years old but looking 60. This is what the islanders described. Families who were healthy suddenly saw their relatives collapse in just a few years. One researcher noted that it was like watching entire generations vanish before they had even lived. To this day, the phenomenon is rarely discussed in history books, because it is uncomfortable evidence of what nuclear testing did to innocent populations. Decades later, some survivors returned to visit the island. One woman described it as a ghost land. The coconut trees gave no fruit. The fish were gone. And her cousins, the ones who stayed behind, looked older than her grandparents. People reported strange burns that appeared overnight. Babies were born with severe deformities. And the scariest part is that even decades after the tests, Geiger counters, the devices that measure radiation, still scream with warning when brought near the soil. Time did not just pass differently for the people. It left scars on the very land itself. So why has almost no one heard this story? The answer is simple: governments wanted people to forget. Admitting that nuclear tests permanently ruined human lives on an island would raise questions no one wanted to answer. It was not just about military power, it was about controlling the narrative. Today, the islands are officially considered safe, according to government statements. But independent scientists who visit report otherwise. In fact, some studies show radiation levels in certain parts are still higher than Chernobyl's exclusion zone. The next time someone tells you aging is natural, remember this: there are places in the world where human beings were forced to live life on fast forward. A whole community erased, not by time, but by human decisions. It is a chilling reminder that sometimes, the scariest truths are the ones hidden in plain sight. If you found this story shocking, share it with someone who loves mysteries, and make sure to subscribe for more dark and hidden curiosities from history. Because sometimes, the things you don't know are the ones you'll never forget.